Hi, I'm Rachel, and I think I have no other choice but to be honest and call this an AM reading for Sunday, June 12th, 2022. I actually tried filming this yesterday, but I think I had too many files on my camera and everything got corrupted, so I lost it. And then I went on with the day a bit, but now I am back. Ready to talk about what I already talked about, but hopefully it all goes smoothly this time. So since this is the first AM reading of the month, I will start this video by pointing out my literary newsletter for last month, for May. I write this literary newsletter on my blog monthly. I include literary news that caught my fancy. I have snippets from my Goodreads reviews of all the books I've read, and then I have a book pick and a book quote, etc. You can find that all linked down below. The next repeat item to check off my list is to talk about the story I read in this collection of short stories by Dorothy Parker. I have been reading one short story in this collection for an AM reading video ever since last May. I believe I will be finished with the collection by the beginning of next year, but so far I'm enjoying this, even today with this story, which is Mrs. Hofstadter on Josephine Street, which Parker published in 1934. And I feel like if there's something in this that I'm missing, maybe there is, but overall, I'm just largely unimpressed. This is a longer story for her, not a dashed off story. It takes place, I guess, at a cottage that a colonel and his wife, who was a writer, they're renting out, so they need some help with, the domestic stuff. They go to an employment agency who hooks them up with this African-American man named Horace, whose claim to fame is that he's worked for years, I think on and off, for a woman called Mrs. Hofstadter on Josephine Street. And he can't shut up about her, and he can't stop being obsequious, and he never lets his employers get in a word edgewise. So obviously this relationship isn't going to work, and ultimately the colonel sort of, throws him out or says, shut up or whatever, and so he leaves, but he feels bad about it, and he, makes one final obsequious phone call, talking about himself in the third person, all that annoying stuff. And the woman hangs up before she can hear about Mrs. Hofstadter for the upteenth time. So yeah, I don't know. I felt like if there's some sort of social commentary in here about, I guess, annoying obsequiousness, it just didn't, I don't know. I didn't care. First of all, most especially, I guess, because the dynamics, the racial dynamics were in play. Usually, I think Parker picks on, the dominant party, not, the minority or the oppressed party. And something else she didn't comment on here at all, or I mean, she did through, I guess, having Horace talk about it, is like how much he distanced himself from the African-American race, and saying the colored race, and saying, me and my daughter and everyone I associate with, we don't do anything with the colored people, we would never, sink that low or something. So, but if there was commentary in there about like internalized racism, she didn't really go into it that deeply, and I don't think it made an impact. So overall, I just feel like this story was a miss for me. The first book I officially finished in June was Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel, which very recently came into my holds at my library. I'd been on the holds list for, I guess, at least a few weeks, maybe a little less time than I thought, but I know there's a bunch of more people behind me who are interested in this book, so I wanted to read it quickly. I guess, frankly, I was also excited to read it because I'm a serial Mandel reader now. I've read everything in her novel length that she's written, and this is her pandemic novel. I guess even more so than Station 11, technically. Of course, like most people, Station 11 was what brought Emily St. John Mandel to my attention, and it remains my favorite book. I feel like there was something really unique in how that came together and what she was trying to say and how it touched people. I mean, even before this pandemic, I mean, I read the book really early when it was published, and for years I've been reading and trying to look for look-alike books, well before COVID-19 brought it back, if it ever left the public consciousness. And anyway, so it's a book that also really changed her trajectory from an author who was largely, with her first 3 books, largely unknown, and to somebody who's like much more on the main stage. So this is her second book that she's written since Station 11, and in fact it came out really quickly after The Glass Hotel, which is her first book after Station 11 did. And I guess it makes sense because there's a dashed off quality and it's a short book, so maybe that's why it could, take so little time to write. This is a story of a time anomaly and of repeat motifs in a lot of ways as we go through different time periods, which have a more autofiction feel to them than any of Mandel's previous work. The first time period takes place in the early 20th century with a character who's loosely based off of one of Mandel's ancestors, a man called Edwin St. Andrew, who was more or less, exiled by his family from the UK after he, said some anti-colonial things about his parents' upbringing in the Raj and what the Indian population might have really thought about all this. And so he is exiled, like, to the wilderness of Canada, and he's just kind of trying to find his way, I think. He's a character without, I feel like, much direction, and he ends up walking in the woods in the Western Canada, and it comes across like this schism in time where he hears some violin music and the whooshing of an airship, which, he has no context for, and then stumbled out of it. And then 80 or so years later, we return to the characters of The Glass Hotel. And Vincent, who was the main character ostensibly from that, as a young child or young teenager, she is, walking through those same woods, making a video, like an ambient video, I guess, of this environs, and she stumbles across that same tear in time where she sees the same, or experiences the same few seconds that Edwin did. And then we jump to the 23rd century, as you do when on the other side of this time jump, there is a violinist in an airship terminal, there is a novelist walking by, and the two of them also, experience the time jump or schism thing where they see the Canadian woods. So in the final timeline, about 200 years after that, there's such a thing as the Time Institute. And they are looking into the idea that maybe the world is a simulation and that this like schism in time is basically the code breaking down or something, and they want to affirm if that happens. So they send a fedora wearing detective character that you find in a lot of Mandel's earlier novels to talk to all of these other characters about what they saw. And they know what these characters saw because the author wrote about it in her best-selling Station 11-esque book. And Edwin wrote about it in letters, and then Vincent has, the footage. So that's the gist of the plot is, although I would say that technically I don't think the question of if there's an anomaly, or not if there's an anomaly, there is one, but the question of like, are we living in a simulation, does that really matter? No, I don't think that really matters at all. I don't think it really matters to Mandel or the story or anything, and I do feel like, I guess the Gasperi storyline, the timeline story, the Time Institute storyline to me was the thing that took me out of this the most. It was just felt like, the stitching together of plot elements that didn't need to be there. I mean, it's hard to explain, I guess, but why it doesn't need to be there. Maybe because it's so obvious that this is not the type of science fiction novel that cares about time travel. I mean, the major themes that it should care about, I think, are these repeat motifs, like pandemics. Like all of these characters in the other timelines are living through or dying through pandemics. And to talk about how things repeat, it's that sense of, in this book, Mandel gets to talk about that sense of in-between space that Station 11 and the Georgia flu never got, because the Georgia flu was a pandemic, but it was an extinction level pandemic. It was 99% of the population dead pandemic. There's no in-between. Everyone's alive, and then a few weeks later, 1% of human race is alive. So that's, society is over and has to like rebuild from the ashes in a way that, we find through COVID-19 and certainly through the influenza of 1918. That wasn't what happened. We didn't have to completely rebuild from scratch. But there was enough disruption to the timeline that it really messed with our routines. It did kill and a lot of people in the process, and but it was much more of an in-between event. And I feel like in a way that's also what Mandel was trying to do with the idea of colonialism, of the UK sort of like building mini UK societies or British societies like in the Raj, and then also in Canada. Like that's a lot that, a lot of, what Mandel does with these characters is have them ruminate because she's a literary fiction writer, or in that bent. And I think in Edwin St. Andrew's Ruminations, there's a lot in there about how Canada's kind of has that sort of mini British feel. And so it almost feels like, and I know from the interviews, like I went virtually to an event Mandel did shortly after this was published, and colonialism really interested her. And I feel like she dropped the ball there, and she really could have built that up about what this really means, this system that we're transposing onto the rest of the world, or colonizers are, or at least the British Empire did, because it's so focused on them. And I wish she'd done more with that, like the unreality of colonization. But at the same time, I just, I guess I'm all in it now for Mandel. I'm just gonna keep reading what she writes. And I still like this a lot. When I like this, I like this. The way she ruminates on the fate of humanity, that's what I guess reminded me the most of Station 11, and that's what I'm the most drawn to here. I even like the ending more or less, I guess, with how everything ties together with Gasperi, even if his storyline didn't quite interest me as much, and the way that like we go through the fleeting plottiness of this is how I learned to be a time traveler, which I feel like almost nobody's interested in, so it doesn't feel real at all. And then we get to the moon and the moon colonies, and there's an interesting sort of reality in play there, because we're obviously a modern audience, so moon colonies feel surreal to us. And then she does create one failed moon colony, which she calls the Night City, which has technological difficulty. So in a way that becomes like a cursed city or a spooked city or something, so it gets to be weird and like otherworldly for the people who grew up there as well. So yeah, she does, I guess, well with people who kind of are a little bit out of time. Like, you think of Miranda and Vincent, who grew up like in, remote Canadian places, and they're, the characters who really fall out of time in Station 11 in the Glass Hotel. So, yeah. I guess I can't help liking this a little bit, but it is not Station 11. It did not touch what she did there. I feel like the type of world building and questions that she likes to ask coalesced with Station 11 that haven't coalesced anywhere else in her books quite the same way. And I guess as a final parting note, I guess it's interesting to think about how this book is so much more about death than the book that she wrote where she killed off 99% of the population. So that's the reality, I guess, of these in-between spaces. But anyway, moving on, the next book I read is similar in that it is also speculative fiction, but it's kind of the opposite end of things. This, rather than being adult science fiction, is YA secondary world fantasy. Maybe the secondary world part is kind of like, right? Anyway, what I'm talking about is A Far Wilder Magic by Allison Saft, which I listened to on audio on Libby from my library. Sea of Tranquility was in my most anticipated reads ever since I heard that, Emily St. John Mandel was coming out with a new novel. But this one, A Far Wilder Magic, I learned about within 2022, and I added it to a list of SFF that I wanted to read this year. I can link to that video down below. And this book is a secondary world fantasy that is very based, I would say, on 1920s America and the nativism and xenophobia of the day. Except that in the secondary world, in the country of New Albion, humans have access to alchemy and to sort of accessing that magical spark. Not all humans, but some humans have that ability. So Wes Winters is a Bonvish Sumic immigrant, which is the way of saying Irish Catholic immigrant in this world. He wants to become an alchemist because the only people who can become politicians are alchemists, and then as one of the only, maybe the first Banvish Sumic alchemist, he can make real change and disrupt the status quo of all the other people who've held power all this time, who are Catharists, and they are the Protestants of this society. And technically speaking, New Albion doesn't have an indigenous population that Saft mentions beyond the Catharists. Yeah, they take on the nativist mantle of "we were here first," and all of these foreign immigrants with their weird religion stuff. They're not the real New Albions. We have to protect our way of life from them. So anyway, Wes goes to this remote, village from his, city life where he lives with his family in a tenement, and he is looking to train under Evelyn Welty, who is this renowned alchemist. But Evelyn Welty has been scarred by tragedy in her past and is obsessively looking for, something for her power, yada yada. And she leaves her daughter Margaret alone in their crumbly mansion. And Margaret has no idea when she's going to be back. Margaret is a very prickly character who keeps herself separate from everyone. She has a Yuadir father, aka a Jewish father, and deals with a lot of anti-Semitism in her hometown and just keeps herself prickly and remote, and has, nothing for Wes, who's this, who kind of uses a sunny disposition to keep his own emotions at bay. And she knows his mother will never take him as a student anyway, so that, of course, this enemies to lovers YA thing starts with, the grumpy sunshine, I think is the trope, beginning. But then Margaret decides that maybe she can use Wes because this magical half-moon hunt is coming to their hometown where everybody is gathering together to kill a last magical being, like a wolf or a fox, named the Hala. And in Catharist lore, it's sort of like a false god, although technically for the Uadirim and the Sumic people, this is it should be a more protected being. But we live in a Catharist society, and they want to destroy this creature. And more importantly, the hunt is like a cultural cornerstone of this is what it means to be a New Albion, that sort of thing. So the fact that Margaret and Wes are going to join at all, people see red over that. Like, how dare these foreigners, get into our sacred traditions. But Margaret and Wes want to do this because the prize money will help Wes's struggling family, and Evelyn could use the magical Hala, for her purposes. So if she gets it, she might stay home, which her daughter wants, and she might train Wes, which Wes wants. So that's why they decide to do this, and a lot of the book is basically taken over to them training, but mostly getting to know each other and breaking down their walls, and then having to deal with a couple of mostly one-note antagonists, I guess. There are people in town who are actually nice to them, and then there's one particularly one-note antagonist, just, your standard supremacist racist walking around, or, supremacist about his religious culture and hating the foreigners, and dealing in the stereotypes, which very much Saft's world building matches real 1920s xenophobia about Catholics and Jews. But still, I feel like that does make this deeper. Like, having different religious cultural stuff makes this like a deeper world building event for YA fantasy than a lot of YA fantasy has built into it. And I enjoyed the characters for the most part. I feel like in this story I never suspended my disbelief enough to really get lost in it. I always saw the strings behind, and all of the plot constructs you know, it's what a novel like this is. You have to have, you know, the types of wrenches and rising action and conflict that Saft throws in there, but I guess I never got lost enough in the story that I didn't know what was coming, and the stuff that was more external, you know, about, the sudden external wrench always annoyed me. The internal stuff worked a little better, but of course, since it is YA, there's so much about these characters who are just denying their realities and feelings so much that some adult readers aren't as into this because it is such a growing up sort of premise. But anyway, there are two other things I kind of struggled with. One of them is a world building plotty thing where, again, you know, the Yuadir and Sumic people treat this Hala as something more holy, and the Hala has actually comes across Margaret and Wes a couple of times and never hurts them, you know, or even tries to. And it feels like Saft is almost building up this message of maybe we're not supposed to kill this creature, and by not killing the creature, something else will come up. But I guess I've spoiled some things. But basically, the ending, the ending ultimately doesn't question things the way things go. I think I've already spoiled you now with what happens at the ending. But it felt weird that like she was building something and then kind of completely abandoned it. And then also something I ruminate about a lot is Jewish content in secondary world fantasy. Now that this is becoming a little more mainstream, I don't know if that's the word, but there are more Jewish fantasies. It's YA Jewish fantasies. In fact, a few weeks ago, there was a bookstore who convened a virtual panel of recent YA Jewish fantasy writers who got together. I think this chat is now online for the public, which I can link down below. And it was interesting to hear these people, who I think are mostly in their 20s, maybe 30s, talk about what brought them to writing YA fantasy. And I think a lot of them come from interfaith families and don't have a lot of real connection, or certainly traditional connection, to Judaism, and that their writings are about them sort of trying to bridge the gap. And that was really interesting for me. I feel like I kind of do the same. I'm also from an interfaith family, although, well, first of all, my mother is Jewish, and in traditional Judaism, that means that everyone accepts me by halacha as Jewish. And people of patrilineal descent in traditional, like Orthodox and even some conservative, or a lot of communities wouldn't be considered Jewish. And also, I feel like, at least from what most of the people on the panel said, they had less Jewish education even than I did, which I guess by this point maybe I should, you know, I've been talking about Jewish stuff forever on this on this channel. Maybe I'm not as ignorant as I once was, but anyway, I definitely have more of a grounding in Jewish religion and culture than I think these authors do. And in the case of A Far Wilder Magic, just like in A Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reed, who Ava Reed was also on this panel, they chose a Jewish character who was not at all really connected to her faith. She had an completely absent Jewish father in a secondary world, and some very vague understanding of tikkun olam as the idea of repairing the world, and that's largely the extent of their Jewish education. And most of what they in the story are dealing with is anti-Semitism, especially in the case of A Far Wilder Magic, where everything Margaret is getting from her antagonists is basically transposed nativist 1920s anti-Semitism. So, I mean, it's a worthy thing to talk about in YA fantasy. You know, oppression and xenophobia often come up in a lot of YA and regular adult, oh my god, sorry, adult fantasy. But I feel like anti-Semitism and like dealing with the gruelingness of anti-Semitism on its own is only part of the story of what it is to be Jewish and to explore Judaism in a secondary world or otherwise. So, I mean, I like this story a fair bit, but I'm writing my own Jewish fantasy novel where I feel like I am dealing far more directly or attempting to, with actual Jewish ideas and practice within the community. We'll see how it goes and how it's received, but that's something that comes up in some of the other YA fantasy books, actually, so maybe I should gravitate toward those next. It's something I'd like to see a little more of, but still, I did like this book. I felt like it was a really engaging story and very likable characters, and I also very much appreciated the narrator of the audiobook, so there we go. And finally, I have a book that I am just a couple chapters into right now. This is Know My Name by Chanel Miller, a famous memoir about written by a woman who was a Jane Doe in a really infamous sexual assault case a few years ago in the US. And I am ostensibly reading this because 2 years ago it won the Nonfiction Prize award in the BookTube Prize. And the BookTube Prize semifinals are going on right now for 2022, and I'm not taking part in them, but apparently you can take the girl out of the BookTube Prize, but not so much the BookTube Prize out of the girl. So I needed to talk more about the BookTube Prize, and besides, I was always interested in this book, and then when it, gained so much favor with the judges that it won the #1 spot 2 years ago, it really cemented that I wanted to put this on my TBR, so hence, here it is. Know My Name by Chanel Miller. So this is her recounting what happened to her, and not only the assault, especially since she was unconscious, so she doesn't actually remember the specifics. A lot of what the trauma is there is the aftermath. And also about, this long court case that preceded what happened to her, and going into the ways that her story was dragged in front of the media for a bunch of judgment. So it goes into, well, the truth is that I think her story was one of the major things that started the Me Too movement about how prevalent sexual assault is. And then, of course, there was the case that her assailant got off really easily, a lot of people believed, so much so that they ultimately recalled the judge who set down the sentencing there for the way that he was lenient on sexual abusers, like her abuser. So, yeah, this book is like a linchpin of some real talking points and maybe even change to a certain degree of how we view sexual assault in the US. And I feel like it really goes into the emotional realities of what it is to deal with all this. She's a strong writer. Maybe so far in these first couple of chapters, maybe she leans a little too much into floweriness sometimes in terms of lyrical writing, but overall I feel like there's something here that's more legit even than the fact that she is a victim of a crime with something to say. I do feel like she also can string something together in an artful way, and it obviously made a pretty big impression on the literary world, so I'm excited to keep going with it, and I will be reporting back next week after I finish it. So that about covers it for me now. Hopefully I will not have to film all of this yet again. I still have some other tasks I want to get to in what remains of this weekend. And I am thinking ahead of when you might see me again on this channel. I was debating my next video being a wrap-up video of a readathon I took part in last month, the Maybe Midrash readathon. But actually, a couple of days from now, I'm having a surgical procedure done, and I'm going to have to start some major prep for it tomorrow, and I'm not sure I'd be quite in the right headspace. I still have to watch a video for this readathon. I have to write a script where hopefully I artfully myself put things together as in analyzing literature next to each other. So I didn't know if that might be a little above my mental capacity, that maybe I should take a little bit of a break this week particularly. And so I might put that off for later in the month, and in the next couple of days, I can come back and do the next installment in my Would You Read This Challenge tag, which I've been doing for the past few months, where I look at some of my past reading. In this next video, I'll look at my year 2015 in reading, take a bird's eye view of that reading, read some quotes from the beginnings of books, and talk about what I make of them now. So stay tuned for that. I hope the rest of you have had productive weekends reading and otherwise, hopefully with fewer technological difficulties than I had. So anyway, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.